I want to say thank you for the CUGC folks for inviting me here. So a lot of you may recognize the name I'm going to say, but I work for Citrix on the technical marketing side. So for the last 5 years, I've worked with Dan Feller. So a lot of what I know has come from him. So I know he's moved on to a different pasture, but he gave me a lot of tips and tricks when getting up in front of you guys. So he said, don't bore them with a lot of PowerPoint and get into the weeds as much as you can. So we're definitely going to try to do that. So what we're talking about today is zero trust. So Citrix is, as we are defining ourselves and redefining ourselves, security is becoming one of the top components in the marketplace today. So one of the things that we're doing is we launched Secure Private Access in conjunction with Secure Internet Access, which gives us a secure access suite. So the zero trust falls into the secure private access. So we're going to take a look at what is zero trust. And ultimately, what it is as everything's moving to the cloud and everything is becoming much more accessible and workers are becoming more remote, we're starting to see threats coming from places that we didn't see before. Users are utilizing devices that they weren't utilizing before. So we have to start looking at security and trust from a perspective that you have no trust with me. And ultimately, you have to earn that trust. And it can be earned at the device level. It can be earned at the user level. It can be lost at the device level. And it can be lost at the user level, as well as the network level. So in the old perimeter used to just be, hey, we were on site. We were connected to our network. There was a little bit less that could get into our network. I mean, there was still the human error, and there was still the human component that would let things happen. But in this case, we have to now expand that because we have the cloud, we have the personal devices, we have people who are traveling. Those individuals are going from place to place to place, and they're connecting to unsecure networks. So there's things that we have to do from this in order to get to where we want to be. So what do we have is we have our applications and we have our users. So in this case, we're going to tie back to CVAD, or DAS as we now know it. So typically you had, everything was in a virtual environment. So there was a little more control from IT as to who could see what, who could go where, and who could do what. So now the users were protected, and the company was protected. As we move into this new realm, we're starting to see that users and the applications are outside of that perimeter that used to be our corporate network. And now we're seeing that 80% of those individuals need some form of zero trust. So now we need to protect not only CVAD, but our web or SaaS apps and then external networks with SPA. So secure private access. Ultimately, what we're looking at is the ability to extend that perimeter around the applications and the components that you as IT folks don't have all that much control over. So by a raise of hands, how many people are utilizing a number of different SaaS-based applications? Salesforce, Workday, all of these different SaaS-based applications you have some control over, but they're out there on the internet. Microsoft 365, it's just there. You know, I mean, there's very little control over who can get to what and who can get to where from wherever they are. So we want to unify this all underneath one banner so that users have one place to go to access all of these applications that they can just type in a URL or click on a bookmark and get to. We want to monetize it so that we can add some new and branded feel to it. But most importantly is we want to reduce the risk. So as we're looking at secure private access, one of the things that we're going to notice is that there's a couple of different feature sets. So there's the zero trust, and that's essentially where we're going to start with everything. We have our adaptive authentication, and that's really what I'm going to kind of show you from a demo perspective and a configuration perspective today. The single sign-on, we all knew that as, you know, secure web access or SWA, whatever name it had at that time. Adaptive access and security controls. So a lot of us knew this from the virtual apps and desktops days as smart access. We've now taken that and have applied it to the new application base with published internal web apps as well as SaaS applications. Browser isolation, we know that as secure browser. We understand the value of that. And obviously, we are now adding visibility and monitoring into how customers are accessing those SaaS-based applications, how often they're accessing them, where they're accessing them from. So zero trust could be anything. So it could be tied to all sanctioned applications, virtual, web app, SaaS, general browsing. We can do multi-factor with our adaptive multi-factor, and that's something that we'll see today. Security controls and SSO. So the security controls piece, that is going to be the smart access. It's also going to be our screen scraping and key logging capabilities within not only apps and desktops, but also for our web and SaaS applications. And obviously, we can see that we have that here. So multiple use cases. As we look at this, is you're going to have your internal web apps. Those internal web apps could be anything from your intranet to whichever web app you might want. You have your public apps that we all are utilizing today. And we have our secure browser service. So if we feel that some of that information we don't want to go through a traditional browser, we can reroute it through a secure browser session. And in that case, we can lock some information down and also make that disposable. All right, so let's get into more of the technical stuff when we look at adaptive authentication. All right, so adaptive authentication. So how this is basically going to flow is the user goes to whichever cloud.com they are. So it could be mywork.cloud.com. It could be workspaces.cloud.com. When they get there, it's going to trigger the authentication. So it's going to go to the service, to Citrix Cloud, and say, hey, I need to authenticate. And it's going to then reach out to the device, to the user. It's then going to identify, are you trying to register a device for a multi-factor, or are you trying to authenticate to a back-end piece of, the back-end, more or less. From there, if I am trying to register, it's going to take me to an authentication page, validate my authentication, and allow me to register my device or my multi-factor token, whatever that might be. If I'm not trying to register a device, it's going to begin a check. That could be an EPA check. It could be tied to the network. There's a number of different things that we can utilize the gateway service to check for. If it passes the EPA check, then it can then say, okay, this device is trusted. And if the device is trusted, present it with said login page and allow the user to log in. If the device is not trusted, or it fails the EPA scan, maybe there's another form of trust I can present to the gateway to say, hey, I'm really okay. And it could be a device, it could be a user certificate, which means that device was registered on the domain and a user certificate was delivered from the domain controller. If that's valid, it can take me right back to a trusted state. If I fail the certificate, or I just say, you know what, I don't want you to run the EPA scan, and I hit skip, I'm going to be considered untrusted. And then that's going to take me to username and passcode, and then it's going to then ask me for whatever might be the next validation. It could be another factor, it could be a number of different things that we can do. But ultimately in the demo we're going to look at is if it's trusted, I'm going to be prompted for username and password. It's going to clearly state that I'm a trusted device. If I am untrusted, it's going to clearly state on the login screen that I am an untrusted device. It's going to ask me for username and password and then do a push authentication to my device. So let's dig a little bit deeper into this. And this is really kind of what we looked at. So if you dig down, the user goes to their workspace. And then that authentication gets routed to the Citrix Gateway for the adaptive authentication. And that service is available in Citrix Cloud. So as you configure that, now when the user gets that, they go to the adaptive auth AAA vServer. So what we're providing customers in the cloud is a managed ADC with a AAA vServer that allows you to configure EPA and everything that we're going to see here today. I'm going to configure my N factor, my smart access, and my OAuth. OAuth is needed so that I can communicate back to the Citrix Cloud. The N factor policies are ideally going to be the trust components. So the trust components could be, is the device trusted? Is the user trusted? Is the network trusted? You know, so whatever level of trust you're looking for, this is what you're going to get. Once I identify if I'm passing these level of trusts, as you can see, different things are going to happen. And as I come down this flow, I'm going to either end up with having no restrictions and be able to access all data, all websites, without any information, without any restriction. If I fail somewhere along the line and I'm deemed risky or untrustworthy for whatever reason, now I'm going to have restrictions applied to that. And those restrictions can be both at the DAS resource level or at the web SaaS resource level. All right, so once again, this is how I set up this demo for you guys today. And we're going to look at the different factors. So the first factor we're going to come in is, hey, I'm new, I need to come in, identify if I need to register a token. Because if I don't have a token and I'm not trusted, I'm not going to be able to get any further than that. So the first thing I'm going to do is identify if I need to register a token. So instead of going to my workspace, I'm going to append the URL with manage OTP or whatever you guys would like to use for your token. And in that case, I'm going to redirect and go through the registration process for the token. Now, if I register the token, everything's okay, I can then go into the traditional authentication. I'm still going to hit the first factor all the time. If I'm not entering, if that URL doesn't have the manage OTP, then it's going to take me to the second factor. The second factor is, hey, do I have a specific file that might exist? And that file could be something that was securely delivered during the management of the device or the controlling of the device. It could be a registry edit. It could be a number of different things. I mean, who here has done anything with N factor? Okay. So it's a very robust option for you when it comes to what you guys can key off of. It could be registry edits. It could be networking. If they're part of a specific subset of IPs, if they're in the United States, if they're out of the United States, if there's a file located in a specific situation, a specific folder in a specific spot on a drive. And then the third one will be, okay, is there a user certificate? And if there's a user certificate, then fantastic, we're going to move forward. If all of that fails, we're going to go to the username password with a passcode, and it's going to be marked or labeled as untrusted. So when we're looking at the smart access components, it's going to be untrusted. So as we're creating labels and we are keying off of trusted or untrusted, if it has the label of untrusted, we're going to then restrict what those users are seeing inside the workspace application. If it's trusted, we're going to label it as trusted, and that's going to then provide us with a trusted label and show us what we're allowed to see with that label. So let's look a little bit more in depth into how that first factor is built. So the first factor is going to start off with our policy, and essentially we're looking for that managed OTP in the cookie. That action has no authentication. So after that, we're going to go to the next factor, which is, in this case, a label that we have labeled. And we're going to have the policy for authentication on. And this could be, in this case, I have both SAML and UDP. You could choose whichever one you want. And then I'm going to say, if it has this manage OTP again, then I'm going to do LDAP authentication. I'm going to go to the next factor, and I'm going to then I'm going to go to the next factor. Authentication is off at this point because I'm configuring my token. It's going to configure the token and write it back to Active Directory. So this is factor one. Factor two, as we get into this, is going to be, okay, first thing we're going to do is, does it have manage OTP in the cookie? Yes or no? If no, it's going to go to the EPA, and it's going to ask, it's going to start a scan. Do you have the agent? If you don't have the agent, you'll be prompted to download it. If you already have the agent, it will automatically launch, scan your system, and determine if you're trusted or untrusted, if you meet any of the requirements that are listed in the policy. So I'm going to go to the action, which is files exist, and here I'm going to list what files exist. If I pass, I'm going to go to the trusted login screen. That trusted login screen is going to basically just take me to an LDAP authentication. Now I've created on the login schema, I configured it to be, where it says, hey, this device is trusted with a little green check mark, makes it very visual for the end user. For some reason, my third factor obviously didn't make the trip, decided to stay at home. But really what you would see here is if there's a false after the EPA auth, it would drop down to the certificate. And then from there, the certificate would say, does the user or does the device have a user certificate? It could be a device certificate. There's a number of different things that you can look for from a certificate perspective. And then if it says, and then in that case, my action would be user cert. And then next, the go-to next would be trusted login. And I'd get to the same trusted login policy. If it says false, it's going to take me to the untrusted login policy, which is still going to be LDAP auth, but it's going to have with OTP. So let's take a look at our demo. All right. All right, so here's a machine. Oh, I have to end my show. All right, so this is Joey. He's a traditional user. He's nothing in particular when it comes to a user. He is more or less your typical end user. So we're going to log in as Joey. And we're going to see, here's our browser. And in this case, this works both through the Workspace app as well as HTML. So for right now, we're going to launch it through the HTML. I'm going to go to my Workspace. And you're going to notice it's going to redirect me to my adaptive authentication. So it's already identified that I have a user certificate. This user certificate was delivered to me from my certificate authority on the domain controller. If I say, yes, use this certificate, I'm going to be trusted. So for this argument, we're going to just say cancel right now because I want to show that the EPA scan is going to kick off. So right now, it's saying, hey, it's going to run the EPA scan, and it's going to come back with the device being trusted. So this is what I was talking about from customization perspective, that you can, in the login schema, you can really get in there and make this screen look the way that you want. But I wanted it to be very clear that this was a trusted device to the user. So I made it, green check mark, trusted in bold, trusted device in capital and bold letters. So now I go ahead and I click on login. And it's going to then authenticate and take me into the Citrix cloud. It's going to then populate the resources that I have available to me. And as you can see, I have a full suite of applications that are available to me because of my status, as well as a full suite of desktops. This is all because I'm a trusted device. So let's come over. Let's sign out. Now, if I'm, for one reason or not, logging into a machine that was never domain joined, didn't receive the user certificate, didn't receive the files, now I'm going to be most likely untrusted. And as I'm untrusted, if I click skip check here, it's basically going to say, hey, I'm not even going to try because we know if I let it run, I'm going to pass. So this is just for demo purposes. Now, I'm untrusted. It knows that I'm not a trusted device. It knows that I don't have access, or I don't have the level of trust the organization requires of me. Either the device doesn't, or me as a user don't have the trust. Now when I click on login here, it's going to send a push notification to my device. Let me find my Citrix SSO, and it just says, do I want to allow login? And I click yes. Now, I could check the box and have to enter in my code. I'm using push because I'm utilizing the built-in OTP within the gateway. Now, once again, I'm still going to have applications that are available to me. It may not necessarily be all of the applications that I had, but one definite notice that you'll see is I have a definite restriction in the devices, in the desktops I can log into. So now I'm missing 2 of the 5 desktops I could log into. And that's because either I'm not trusted or the device is not trusted. Now, as we kind of go through these levels of trust, we're going to notice that from here, we're going to have different levels of smart access. So that smart access could be what? It could be watermarking. It could be the inability to use copy and paste on a web and SaaS application. So depending on what I'm trying to access will depend on what level of trust I have from the organization. So if we kind of go back one step, and I'm going to launch this really quick, hopefully really quick. And I'm going to go into that ADC so that we can look at what it's actually structured like. Because I can put it into a flow, but till you actually see it, it doesn't mean as much. Let me see. While we're waiting for that, let's open up here. I'm going to go into my Citrix Cloud. So I want to show you what you need to enable in order to get this level of access. So, for example, inside Citrix Cloud, there's a couple of things I need to make sure that I'm utilizing from an authentication perspective. One of those is going to be a Citrix Gateway. So I can't just, in my workspace configuration, I can't just say, hey, I want to utilize Azure AD or Okta or just traditional AD. I need to route through the gateway so that I can do the N factor and the scans appropriately. And I apologize in advance, but this is probably going to look very tiny. Maybe not as bad as I thought. So I went into my security. I created an application server. And then from there, see if I can not scroll too far. If I go to my virtual server, you're going to see my adaptive authentication server. It's going to be NATed to a public IP address. It's going to have a fully qualified domain name and an FQDN and web access to it. So here, because I'm utilizing user certificate, I have to trust my certificate authority. So here I went in and I added the root certificate for my certificate authority on the domain controller. And as I scroll down, I'm going to look at my authentication policies. And this is where we see those 3 authentication policies that we built. So I'm going to have my manage OTP, my EPA, and my user certificate. So if I go in and we'll look at the EPA scan, if I go ahead and I edit this binding, you're going to see that that the next factor is going to be the trusted login. And I can come over here and I can edit that. And now I can also edit this binding, but here's my login schema, and then it's basically telling me at this point that I'm going to go to the authentication, and I can either use the SAML or the UDP. Now the user cert, this is the part that I didn't have the flow on, so I wanted to make sure everybody got an opportunity to see this. But when I look at this binding here, it's going to look at the user certificate policy. And if I go ahead and I edit that, you're going to see that there's two different policies that it's going to evaluate. The user cert and the untrusted, which is, hey, I did not meet any of the previous requirements, and it's going to take me to, in that case, whichever factor is next, which could be the untrusted device, and that's where I've chosen the OTP, or I can go to the trusted. Now, a lot of people say, well, how do you go ahead and you register that device? So in this case, I just go ahead and I type in nope, that's not where I want to go. So if I come over to my login and I actually type in manage OTP, it takes me right to an authentication screen where I can log in and I can add my device or I could test my device. So this is that first factor that we're going to look at. And if I'm not putting in that manage OTP, it completely skips this one. And it goes right to what we would expect from the authentication flow. It's going to run the EPA scan. If I don't have it, it's going to ask me to download it. So we kind of looked at the ADC. We looked at the vServer and how we stacked those policies, and we created the different priorities for those. One of the things that I took for granted with you guys is that we also created 6 smart access policies. So this is going to be, are these files there? If they are, make it trusted. If it's trusted, send that label to Citrix Cloud. So in that case, in the Citrix Cloud side, we had the opportunity to look at my workspace configuration. And this is where you have to go in and you have to set your authentication to Citrix Gateway. And when you set it to Citrix Gateway, you're going to have to go through an OAuth procedure to make sure that now your gateway is now communicating to your OAuth. Now, when I come in and I want to set up this service for the first time, there is going to be my identity and access management. And when I go to my authentication, I'm going to see my Citrix Gateway. When I set this up for the first time, I will actually be able to go through a flow, and the service is going to be inside Azure. So you need to be able to link your on-prem AD to Citrix's Azure. And how we do that is you can either do that via a direct connect. So if you have direct connect with Azure, you can set it up that way. Or we now allow you to utilize a cloud connector. So that cloud connector will allow for that communication back from the Citrix Azure to your AD, and it's fully encrypted and authenticated. So at this point, I've set it up, and when I go to my services, and I go to Secure Private Access, I'm going to be able to get all of the policies and dynamics that I'm getting from my web and SaaS applications right here. So I can look at my dashboard. If I go to the identity and authentication, this is where I'll actually be walked through the wizard, and it will spin up the virtual ADC. It will then walk me through all the necessary configuration, and then I just have to create my own policies. So in this case, when I built this, we were not utilizing cloud connectors to allow us to connect to Azure. So I did not have the capability to do a direct connect. So I built this with an on-prem ADC. So one of the things I wanted to talk about is we have all of these configurations and we can enable it, but there are options to keep this fully cloud-based or to migrate or have it to work on-prem if you have an existing ADC. There are some limitations from the on-prem perspective in comparison, and I actually have a slide that will address those. Here's our access policies. So this is smart access for web and SaaS. So here you can see if the device is if it's an untrusted device, if it's connecting to a specific network, if the device has if the device is just untrusted because it didn't pass a location, not the location, it didn't pass user cert or the EPA scan, then in this case, it would go ahead and hide these web apps. So for example, if I edit this policy, one of the things you'll be able to see is, hey, it's doing the device posture check, and because I set those labels up and I'm passing those labels back to Citrix Cloud, I can deny access, and I can add the application. So in this case, I blocked Salesforce as a SaaS app. So let's go back to the presentation. And that's a lot of the demo part. I could walk through building it all, but it would be a lot of eye strain for everyone. So that's why I went with the flow, because I thought it might be a little bit easier for people to see. One of the things I want to do with these different flows is I'm going to probably dig a little bit deeper into it. And I'll have the flow 1, flow 2, and flow 3, and then I can make those available as people would like, if people wanted to see that and they wanted to follow through the flow. There's nothing proprietary about this. It's just how I chose to name things. You could name them whatever you want. But let's take a quick peek at so this is the service itself. So the service is there. So the users talk to the service, which then take you back to the workspace. So this is a authentication server that's in the cloud. It's a single tenant. Citrix does all of the management, lifecycle, upgrades. So very much like moving to DAS service. We're going to manage all of that. We make the UI much more simpler, so you don't have to be a NetScaler mastermind to do it. I will be the first to admit I am not a NetScaler guy at all, and I could walk through it and configure adaptive authentication. And then you have your policy configuration with contextual access. and then obviously with the HDX. So here's that side by side. So if you had an existing on-prem, you can do most of it. As we add features and functionalities to this, it's going to obviously hit the cloud first. And the Azure Active Directory support and Okta, that's the cloud. It's in the cloud because we're utilizing Citrix Identity Service for that. So the multi-factor, as I kind of said earlier, these are just kind of highlights and reviews. User, location, and device posture. So those are all the things that we can look at when we're identifying if we should use multi-factor and identify a device as trusted. We can, from a multi-factor, tie into a number of different Radius solutions. And this is replacing an on-prem gateway. The service would replace your on-prem gateway for the delivery of the N-factor component of it. And that's everything I have. Are there any questions? Any comments? Do you like it? Do you not like it? That's really good stuff. How did I do for my first CUGC? Was it too high level? Not deep enough? I'll tell you, I was really nervous. Because I've seen Dan present, and I mean, those are big shoes to fill. So, but I just wanted to say, if I go all the way back to the beginning, if I could do that quicker, I would. If you run into any questions or you want to ask me anything about adaptive authentication, my email's up there. Feel free to shoot me an email. I'll be more than happy to do whatever I can to help answer any questions or guide you to the right people. I mean, once again, I'm in technical marketing, so I'm technical, but I also still am in marketing. So there's only so much you can do from that perspective. Thank you guys all.